Pastor Taylor here, Christ Pewaukee. It's nice to be here with you in God's Word, and maybe better said, in God's love. How does God's love make you feel? If you had to put a picture to it, what picture would you use to describe that feeling on the inside that God's love has done for you, makes you feel? God's word before us is from Hosea chapter 14, and here God's love is laid before his people. And he describes the effects of his love, God does, with beautiful imagery. And that beautiful imagery is taken from nature. For the effects of God's love on his people are like dew. Dew in our climate is different, maybe not as much appreciated as it is in the climate that God's people were living. It might be for us a nuisance to have to mow the lawn with a little bit of dew that gets our shoes wet. But for God's people in that climate, they loved the dew. They needed the dew. It was vital. And it came so silently, but it came every day. God's love is like that for us too. It's during those quiet, silent moments of Bible study, perhaps even like the one you're having right now, where God and his love come upon you and cover over you. It's a vital way, that is with devotion, to start your day. And it's vital to not a climate, not to your fields or your vegetation. It's vital to your faith to have this time in God's Word. And then you have and hear God's love for you in his Word. And another picture used here is that you blossom like a lily. And lilies are beautiful. In part, that's, I guess, why we named our daughter Lily. It makes me think of that Bible passage that Jesus talks about, the lilies of the field that do not labor or spin, yet they are clothed with more splendor, more beauty than even Solomon with all his wealth. And so it is when God's love covers over us, we are clothed with the same beauty. We give off the same wonderful fragrance. But a lily's roots are only so deep. You can easily pick up and pull out a lily in the field without much problem. And that's why another effect of God's love isn't just that we're nice to look at or sweet to smell, but we have roots that are deep, roots that are like the mighty cedar of Lebanon, which is also described in God's Word. And who of us doesn't have that same feeling when we review and study God's Word and God's love? We feel more rooted in it, unmoved by it, by whatever the it is in our life. We have that blessing. And to continue with this tree picture, we're also an olive tree. God's love makes us like an olive tree, yes. Olive trees in, again, that climate of God's people who are listening to these words, well, they did well in that dry, arid climate. Those olive trees certainly needed the morning dew, but they could handle it if it got a little dry. You see, another feature that I read about with olive trees is that for the most part they're green when other plants are brown. And isn't that the case for us? As we study and are rooted in God's Word, unmoved by the promises that God shares with us, we're like that olive tree too. We're green when everything around us is brown. And it doesn't mean that the surroundings aren't brown, it just means that we still have hope. Hope in a God who loves us and cares for us. And another picture that God's Word uses is that it's like a field that produces. It's a field that produces grain. It's not fallow or barren. It's producing grain. It's flourishing. It's also a vine, and not just a vine that's withering and dying, but a vine that has grapes on it, and those grapes produce wine. Again, all these are beautiful images of God's love for undeserving people like you and me. And we appreciate pictures like this. I know I do. But at the end, Hosea lays it out there. There's no picture anymore, just a simple and true declaration that by God's grace, we know. We understand these things. We believe them. We walk in them because they're right. And we thank God that they are. Hosea 14, beginning at verse 5. I will be like the dew to Israel. He will blossom like a lily. Like a cedar of Lebanon, he will send down his roots. His young shoots will grow. His splendor will be like an olive tree, his fragrance like a cedar of Lebanon. People will dwell again in his shade. They will flourish like the grain. They will blossom like the vine. Israel's fame will be like the wine of Lebanon. Ephraim, what more have I to do with idols? I will answer him and care for him. I am like a flourishing juniper. Your fruitfulness comes from me. Who is wise? Let him realize these things. Who is discerning? Let them understand. The ways of the Lord are right, but the righteous walk in them. The ways of the Lord are right, the righteous walk in them, but the rebellious stumble in them. That was the word of the Lord. Blessings on the rest of your day.